Inside every MGB is a beautiful surprise.
Hello, Wobbly Phil here. So, you want to own a classic car. You've finally crawled your way to the top of the money tree, or saved, begged and borrowed enough dosh to make the dream come true. You fantasize about carefree days with the top down as you whisk past onlooking admirers at the helm of your shiny machine. Well, for many, I guess that all works out, and I'm not here to be a spoilsport. I've lived the fantasy myself, but I have to admit that the experience has been, well, shall we say, mixed. First off, I'll be straight with you and say I haven't spent as much time on the road with classic cars as I have with classic motorcycles. If you want to know more about my experience with classic bikes, please do watch my previous video. There's a link to that in the description below. And remember, this is a purely personal take on classic car ownership. Many folk will have had much better times than me. If you have, feel free to chime in on the comments. Full disclosure, I've mainly owned classic cars before they were really deemed to be classics. I am 84, you know. But the first classic I owned was actually considered a classic when I owned it, and is even more of a classic these days, a 1971 MGB Roadster.
Today's MGB has rack and pinion steering, race season suspension, 4-speed gearbox and hefty 1798cc engine.
This symphony in white with the proper chrome bumpers was, in my humble opinion, gorgeous. My dream car, and I still love the look of them. To me, the front end has echoes of the Jaguar E-Type, nowadays the preserve of hedge fund managers and city lawyers with 100,000 or more in loose change that's wearing a hole in the pockets of their Prada chinos. But this car was literally the work of the devil. It even possessed the number of the devil, DAF 666K. Yep, I bought a car that had the number of the beast on it. The B obviously stood for Beelzebub on this particular MGB. Having forked out the princely sum of 1,019.81 Great British pounds, about £3,600 or $4,600 in today's money, I proudly drove this motorised Lord of the Flies home and parked it in the drive. A cup of tea later and I was desperate to take it out for a spin. When I returned home, there where I had previously parked it were two perfectly positioned brake pads, which had dropped out of the front disc brakes when I'd reversed out. So I got those fixed, but then discovered that it had another peculiarity. At legal speeds on the motorway, it gave a decent impression of being powered by a satanic steam engine. Further investigation revealed the cylinder head was warped, causing coolant to enter the cylinders, hence the steam. Bear in mind, this car was only 10 years old at the time, so the head was skimmed, which did nothing to exorcise this locomotive Lucifer. Eventually, in a traffic jam, I carelessly nudged the back of the VW Golf in front of me. This was literally at a crawl not much faster than an overexcited snail. The Golf was fine, of course, but the entire front end of my MGB disappeared in a puff of dust. It was all filler. In fact, most of the entire bodywork was filler. Thanks to the miracle of the internet, I see that far from being consigned to the Hobbs of Hades where it belongs, this beast still lurks on the highways. If you're the owner, do get in touch. A few years later, though, I did it again.
Presenting the shape of things to come, with more control with a lower suspension, more rubber with wider steel-belted radials, more gears with 5-speed standard or optional automatic.
Now, I also happen to think that Triumph TR7s are a good-looking car, although I do understand that other opinions are available. So, in the late 1980s, I bought a second-hand one, a soft top, in gold. To me, it was fast-ish, sexy and super, but they've never really transcended to classic status. But this car was only about 5 years old at the time, and in pretty good condition. It was so relatively new that you could even take it to a British Leyland dealer and get it serviced, which is what I did. After the service, I picked the golden wedge up and brimmed the fuel tank, ready for a bit of a burn. But halfway down the Camden Road in London, I began to smell smoke. This was not the kind of burn I'd been hoping for. Flames began licking through the dashboard. Alarmed, I pulled to the side of the road and switched off the ignition. Maybe it was an electrical fire. But no, flames were now leaping 10 feet out of the grills in the bonnet. Worse still, trying to make a rapid evacuation, I discovered the seatbelt was stuck in its buckle. I eventually managed to undo the seatbelt and rapidly exited, but by now the TR7 was well alight. I dashed over to a theatrical costumiers and grabbed the first fire extinguisher I saw. But by then it was too late. The car was engulfed, the fire brigade was called, and it took half an hour and all their foam to put it out. I was even on the Capital Radio Flying Eye for blocking most of North London.
With the flying eye!
Any photos of the car went up in the fire in a briefcase I had to abandon on the passenger seat. A nice Portuguese tourist took some shots of the smouldering, tangled mass of blackened metal and promised to post them to me. This was before digital, but sadly they never arrived. If you're out there, Jose, and still have them, email me. Thanks, British Leyland. Thanks, British Leyland dealership. Oh, and this car also had an interesting number plate, which I see went off the grid when it self-immolated and was written off. Good job too. But I love a sporty car, and having learnt my lessons from the Brits, I turned Japanese for my next one.
There's a new game in town. It's called Putting the Fun Back into Driving. Introducing the Toyota MR2 sports car.
Not dissimilar in wedgie appeal to the TR7, the Mark I Toyota MR2 has actually become a sought-after classic, and you don't see many of them around these days. This mid-engined pocket rocket was brilliant, so good in fact that I bought two in succession, both red, and put up with the very 1990s abuse that I owned a hairdresser's car. It was all bulletproof and ran on rails, but on my numerous trips to France at the time, MR2, pronounced MR2 in French, did cause some hilarity. That's not to say there weren't foibles. There was an occasional drip from the sunroof in wet weather, and as the RAC man who regularly attended me said, the starters are always sticking on these. A quick whack to the starter with a rod and hammer used to sort that out. The front end was so light that stopping in the wet was an interesting experience. And I once spun a full 360 on a frosty road in the middle of Islington. Fortunately, there was nothing else coming, and it must have looked to the surprised folk at the bus stop like I'd pulled off a James Bond manoeuvre. Turn right, spin it in a full circle, and exit the way you were originally intending. And talking of James Bond, I wouldn't be putting your laptop containing all those top-secret files in the small rear boot either. It was easier to pop open than a can of Coke. Bringing up the rear in more ways than one was my Fiat Coupe 20-valve turbo. Again, a kind of wedge, but this time combined with a curve. Not everyone's cup of tea, I know. By the late 1990s, Fiat had thrown off its fix-it-again Tony image, and the Fiat Coupe was what you'd now call their halo car. I was tempted by the looks and the blistering performance, 0 to 60 in a little over 6 seconds, and bought this one brand new. I drove the Green Mean Machine out of the North London showroom and stopped at an Esso garage half a mile down the road to fill it up. When I got back in, I discovered the accelerator pedal had dropped off its linkage in half a mile from the showroom. My RAC man, who by now had just about become my best mate to the point where I was thinking of inviting him down the pub for a pie and a pint, said it wasn't uncommon for the accelerator pedals to fall off. He'd even heard tell of a new Fiat Coupe that had gone back to the dealer to fix a rattle, and they'd discovered an empty tin of Peroni beer in the front offside wing. Anyway, despite the Flash Gordon looks, the luxurious smell of the leather seats, and the great performance, my love affair with an Italian didn't last. Nowadays, I drive an electric vehicle, which is utterly reliable and knocks the socks off any car powered by dinosaur juice that I've ever owned. And that makes me happy. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, then please consider liking and subscribing to let YouTube's algorithm know we're doing something right here at 3 Phils. Thank you.